welcome to the Jiu Jitsu podcast. My name is Stacy. I'm a Jiu Jitsu, and this is my podcast. So since I've started the podcast, I've been getting a lot of really great feedback from people, and a few questions too. I have been approached by a few people and asked to explain exactly how Jiu Jitsu is good for self-defense. So these are people who are interested in Jiu Jitsu, but they don't really know what makes Jiu Jitsu great for self-defense versus another art, such as, karate or taekwondo. So this is understandable, especially if you're not a person who's familiar with martial arts or who only really has the knowledge that you've learned from watching TV and movies. So in this episode, I wanted to clear things up. Okay, so to start, let's define our terms. So basically, what do we mean by self-defense? I want to discuss what it's not and then discuss what it is. So what is not self-defense? So self-defense is not about quote-unquote winning a fight or beating somebody up or going around bragging and peacocking to others about how you can take them down and whatever. Okay? It's not sticking around in a bad situation to try to prove a point by throwing hands with some schmuck in the street. We do not continue the fight if we are defending ourselves. Okay? So then what is it? What is self-defense? Self-defense is ensuring your own survival, protecting yourself, protecting those who are weaker than you. It's also prevention and de-escalation of a situation and being able to get yourself out of a bad situation. So, like I said before, we don't just stick around in a bad situation. We don't stick around once we get a more favorable position and just start wailing on somebody. That's not what we're about. That's not jiu-jitsu, and that's not how I define self-defense. We get ourselves out of a situation, then get away and call for help. Okay? So in the words of Professor Carlos, quote, "Jiu-jitsu is not the art of going around kicking everyone else's butts. It's the art of learning how not to get your own butt kicked." Okay, so what exactly makes Jiu Jitsu good for self-defense? So I have about 5 different kind of categories that Jiu Jitsu excels at that are good for self-defense and protection and just in general. So the first one, what makes Jiu Jitsu good for self-defense is the mindset, the confidence, and the awareness that it gives you. Because we believe the best fight is the one that never happens. So what does this mean exactly? So this teaches us to stay calm under pressure, to let go of your ego and the urge to lash out when you're triggered by somebody. This teaches us to have trust and confidence in our own bodies, in ourselves, and in our training. This also teaches us body awareness, situational awareness. It teaches us to stay alert and also to pick up on, the vibes of a person or a situation so that we can end a conversation or remove ourselves from a situation before anything gets escalated. The second is what we call verbal jiu-jitsu. And again, this goes with the mindset of the best fight is the one that never happens. So jiu-jitsu, the verbal jiu-jitsu teaches us to use our words, keep a calm voice, placate the person, or de-escalate a tense situation, which might mean apologizing, even if you don't have anything to apologize for. So anybody who's ever worked with the public knows how valuable of a skill this is. Okay. Yeah, because it helps to de-escalate a tense situation. It helps to placate the person who's angry. The verbal jiu-jitsu also helps us to use our words to set boundaries with others, to either keep them away from your face, out of your space, things like that. So what are some examples of this? Let me give you a couple. Example 1. I've already asked you to stop talking to me this way. I'm going to end this conversation now. Example 2. Oh, I prefer handshakes over hugs. Example 3. Thank you for offering, but I prefer to do this myself. Okay, using your words, it sets a very clear boundary, and it sets up the expectation of what you will and will not tolerate. The third thing that jiu-jitsu helps with in terms of being great for self-defense is that we actually do learn takedowns. We learn elements of judo. We train elements of judo that will help us get our attacker off of their feet. So this will not only help us have a better control over the person, but a lot of the time this is going to take the attacker off guard or momentarily knock them for a loop when they hit the ground, which a lot of the time that moment is enough for us to gain control of the situation. Also, the judo elements help us to, avoid, deflect, or diminish the power of any punches or kicks that might happen. We learn to give them, but we also learn how to deflect and avoid them. Also, we learn how to break fall. Knowing how to break fall is critical for minimizing damage if we are ever pushed or pulled to the ground. So part of our training, a huge part of our training, is learning how to fall safely and redistribute the force of the fall before we learn how to throw other people. Self-defense, safety first. The 3 most common ways for a fight to start is a push, a punch, or a headlock. And so a lot of times these 3 common ways to start fights will result in somebody being forced to the ground in some way. So if that is us, we don't want to, knock our head on the ground or brace ourselves with our hands and then get a broken wrist. We don't want to do that. So we learn how to break fall safely. Okay. Next, and this is the biggest one, and actually in my notes I wrote it in all capital letters because this is the thing that sets us apart in jiu-jitsu versus other arts, and that is fighting off of your back. This is our biggest advantage. As jiu-jitsu practitioners, we are the most powerful when we are on the ground. Most of the other arts that I know of emphasize strikes, standing game, that kind of thing. But once the fight goes to the ground, most people don't really know how to protect themselves or how to get back up. We, as jiu-jiteras and jiu-jiteros, we literally train for this. Okay? Positions like guard give us power. Even though it might seem disadvantageous on the outside, that's actually one of our most powerful positions. Knowing how to move my own body around another person's body while I'm lying on the ground, or, how to use leverage to move another person's body off of my body while I'm lying on the ground, this is essential for survival. Being on the ground puts you at a huge disadvantage and makes you vulnerable if you don't know what to do. By way of example, there are horrifying videos floating around all over the internet about middle schoolers or high schoolers who will literally jump each other for fun. And they'll sit on the kid and just wail on them while everybody else stands around recording it. And there's also other equally horrifying videos around the internet of security camera footage showing women or elderly people being jumped by random strangers on the street or dragged over to a car or dragged around a corner or whatever, for whichever nefarious purposes the attacker has in mind. So, okay, side story. Truthfully, let me tell you guys. Truthfully, I was extremely interested in Jiu Jitsu specifically because I wanted to be able to defend myself in the event somebody tried to rape me. Seriously. I wasn't necessarily expecting that this was going to be a daily occurrence, but especially after like the incident that happened where I'm just like, oh man, and I didn't have options. And then I realized, it was like, man, there's a lot that I don't know. I need to figure this out. And then also because I was working in downtown Chicago and going through an alley to get to the back entrance of where I was working, I had to face reality. I had to admit to myself that like this very well could be a situation I find myself in. And if that's the case, if I'm, like upping my chances of having this happen by nature of being around all these other people, in a city, because there's so many people there, then I need to figure out what to do about it. And so the fact that Jiu Jitsu specializes in fighting off of your back, especially with the guard being an extremely powerful position for the person on the ground, I thought, that's it. That's the one. Okay. And it's more than I ever thought. I've learned so much, not just in terms of technique, skills, and things like that, but also about myself, and I've grown as a person, and this has really been the best thing. So anyway, circling back to the point, fighting off of your back on the ground. This is what we specialize in Jiu Jitsu, and this is really where it's at. Okay, 5th is get out and get away. Okay, I've mentioned this before. Getting up, get out, get away. We train for this. Self-defense, survival. Okay, why? We are focused on surviving. So most of the time, that's going to involve minimal direct tussling with somebody. We focus on protection, control, and escape. We want to conserve our energy as much as possible so that we don't exhaust ourselves in the struggle. So therefore, we use leverage, technique, timing, proper execution, and with minimal strength involved. Okay, so if you're so exhausted you can hardly think straight after struggling with somebody and being in fear of your life, that's really, really not going to help you. So we train for this. To help us with this as well, we practice a movement that we call the technical lift. This helps us get up quickly from a seated position while not turning our back on our attacker or compromising our balance, or as we call it, our base. Okay, this also will serve as a protective stance for us, as we're able to use our leg, via kicks, to keep our attacker at bay long enough for us to get up. Also, we learn how to break grips. Breaking grips is important. We learn how to get somebody's hands off of us by breaking grips in various ways. This is also a really great preventative measure too, used before a fight or some sort of situation really gets started. Because somebody can't toss you around if they can't really hold on to you, right? Yeah. Okay. So let's say you manage to break the grip, get away from the person. Okay, now what? We are trained to do enough to protect ourselves and get out of the situation, and then run away and call for help. Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, we are not going to be sticking around and getting into a movie-worthy street brawl. Plus you never know how many little friends your attacker has hiding in the shadows. Okay, guys, you're not Chuck Norris, okay? You're not Chuck Norris. Just leave the situation and call for help. All right? This isn't going to turn out like you think it will in the movies, okay? So get up, get out, get away. Sorry, I'm laughing at my own joke. Okay. So, Jiu Jitsu is absolutely the best art for self-defense. And it's available to all people, no matter what size you are, your strength levels, your gender, your athleticism, any of that stuff. Okay, and I'm going to talk about that in more detail in a future episode. Jiu Jitsu teaches us to stay calm in stressful situations and to not let our ego take over our common sense. Jiu Jitsu teaches us how to use momentum, leverage, technique, and timing to protect ourselves against an attacker and escape a bad situation. And isn't that really what self-defense means? Protect yourself and get out. So hopefully this answered your questions about how and why Jiu-Jitsu is the best art for self-defense. Guys, if you want to continue this conversation, I would love to hear from you. Send me a message. You can email me. I have an email. I have all this stuff linked in the show notes all the time. But yeah, if you guys want to talk more about this or ask questions, or if you want to hear anything from me about this or any other topics for future episodes, let me know. I love hearing from you guys. So you can email me at jujiteraspodcast@gmail.com, or you can message me on Instagram, at jujiteraspodcast. Actually, I also have a Facebook page. I created a page. Guess what it's called? It's Jiu Jitera's Podcast. How did you know? Jiu Jitera's Podcast. Find me on Facebook. You can find me over there, Instagram, or by email. So, yeah. Find me around social media, guys. Let's chat. I would love to hear from you. And until then, see you next time. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to this podcast, give it a rating, and leave me a review. If you have any questions for me, or if there's something you want me to talk about, then DM me on Instagram at jujiteraspodcast, or email me at jujiteraspodcast@gmail.com. These will all be linked in the show notes below. See you next time.